Hey friends, welcome back to Movies in a Bottle, and today we're doing a very special 500 subscriber episode. We've already come a long way since we started just a few months ago, so editor JK is going back to remaster the audio on some of our earlier uploads and do a 4-pack of action movies. First up is going to be Men in Black, but remember, if you like revisiting movies of years past, go ahead and like and subscribe for weekly breakdowns. But without further ado, let's roll film. A driver is hauling a bunch of seemingly undocumented passengers when he shouts back that there's a checkpoint ahead. Notice the one in the brown poncho looks last. The driver isn't able to talk himself out of the situation, so the back of his truck is searched where all the passengers are discovered. Before the cop can go any further, two men dressed in black suits show up saying that they're from a division that the cop has never even heard of, and they take over the traffic stop. Kay interviews everyone, and they all do well, except the one in the brown poncho. So he sends them all away, and the man in the poncho turns out to be an alien. Like, from space. Fun fact, actor Tommy Lee Jones is bilingual from growing up in Texas, so he had no problem with his Spanish lines. This seems like business as usual for the agents, but the interrogation with the alien is cut short when the cops get curious and tries to see what's going on. This gives the alien a chance to run, and the older agent, D, gets knocked down and nearly lets the alien attack the terrified cop, but K blasts him in time. All the cops are rightfully confused, especially the one in alien guts, but K flashes them with a trusty neuralizer and makes them think this was all a gas explosion. Then K and D look at the stars together one last time before D tells his partner that he's too old for this now, but he will miss the chase. But Kay's last words to his dear friend are the sad truth that, no, he won't, before neuralizing him too. Men in Black was originally a comic book that was eventually rolled up into being owned by Marvel. Sony made the film because they had the movie rights, while Marvel still had the comic book rights, kind of like that Spider-Man situation. Tommy Lee Jones enjoyed the comic book so much, he actually signed on before there was ever even a first script. He said that he knew smart and talented people would be attracted to it. And although he went on to reject the initial script they proposed to him, I think they nailed it in the end. We cut to an exciting foot chase taking place in the Big Apple. Jay, or James for now, outruns his fellow officers and keeps pace with an insanely fast and acrobatic suspect even after he leaps over a bridge. James can't do that, but he is resourceful and he uses the city to his advantage by hitching rides and taking shortcuts to catch back up. The suspect seems panicked but tries to pull a gun only for it to vanish after hitting the ground, then he ominously warns that he is coming. The suspect does an impressive maneuver to get away, followed by a superhuman maneuver to scale a building. Again, James is resourceful and manages to run fast enough to confront the suspect on the roof. James is weirded out after seeing him blink sideways, but then he repeats that someone is coming and we're too late before throwing himself over the edge. During a peaceful night in the country, a farmer named Edgar is complaining to his wife, Beatrice, about how his truck is the only thing pulling its weight around here before it gets totally smashed by a UFO. At the crash, a voice asks Edgar to drop his weapon, but he believes in the Second Amendment too much and tells the alien to pry the rifle from his cold, dead fingers, which the alien finds acceptable and proceeds to relieve Edgar of all of his remaining life and borrows his skin as a suit. We're just gonna continue to call the alien Edgar for convenience, but although he looks like him, he's definitely not. He goes inside and weirds Beatrice out by drinking an unholy amount of sugar water. Then she comments how his skin has fallen off his bones, then he agrees and fixes it by stretching his Edgar suit, causing her to faint. At the police station, James is being questioned all about the botched chase. The cops clearly don't like James, and they certainly don't believe his story either, but a lady comes in quickly introducing herself as Deputy Medical Examiner Laurel Weaver, and she says that she believes him and wants to talk more at the morgue. She's not going to remember that though, because Kay makes sure to neuralize her, and then he unplugs the cameras before talking with James alone. James repeats the weird details, but unlike the other cops, Kay is taking him seriously and even wants to know if he could recognize the weapon that vanished if he saw it again. They go to a pawn shop to find out, and on the drive, James tries to guess which organization Kay belongs to, but doesn't believe his answer whenever he finds out that he works with aliens here on Earth. He doesn't have to wait long for proof though, and I want to go real moment to moment here because I love this next scene. They pull up to a shady pawn shop that James recognizes but thinks the owner Jeeves is too low level to deal in guns, so he tells Kay that he expects real answers after they're done wasting time here. Inside, Jeeves confirms James' story, saying that he doesn't know anything about weird guns, but gets visibly nervous when Kay walks in demanding that he shows James the imports. Jeeves feigns ignorance at first, but Kay draws his weapon and counts down from 3. James is playing a little good cop bad cop until Kay really blasts his head off, and James shouts at Kay to drop the weapon. But he stares in disbelief as Jeeves' head grows back before his eyes, and Kay makes him flip a switch to reveal all the alien weapons hidden everywhere. Sure enough, James recognizes the vanishing gun, and Kay reprimands Jeeves and tells him to get off this rock. They leave, and to help James deal with tonight's otherworldly events, Kay makes him forget it all happened. But he regains his senses in the middle of an apparently hilarious story from Kay, who leaves in a hurry after telling James to be at the address at this business card at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Back at the farm, Edgar's spree of evil continues when an unlucky exterminator ends up being the exterminated. And he gets his truck stolen, but thankfully it's too small for the UFO. Or is it? James goes to the address on the business card, which couldn't look any more inconspicuous if it tried, and once inside, he's instructed to take the elevator. After it stops, the head honcho himself is there saying that he's late and introduces himself as Zed, which always confused me until I learned places like Canada pronounce Z like that. He tells them that they're looking for the best of the best, and they only have one open position. James then goes on to stick out like a sore thumb in every way, from his casual attitude and attire to his unorthodox testing approaches. He breaks his pencil, he drags the table over to use, and he only shoots once during the weapons test, and his explanation actually has a ton of subtle world building. He didn't shoot any of the obvious targets because while they all seemed scary, upon James's closer inspection, they all had very rational reasons for their appearances, like an alien lifting weights or one with a sniffly nose. But little Tiffany shouldn't be out here at night with a quantum physics book, so that's why he made sure she got popped. Then, without a word, Zed leaves and joins Kay watching above and tells him that he hopes he knows what he's doing. Zed congratulates all the men in uniform and takes them to the final part of their test, the eye exam, aka the neuralizer, because they all suck. But Kay pulls James aside and tells him the purpose and the history of the Men in Black. In the 50s, the government started an organization to make contact with aliens. Everyone thought it was a joke until he was a group of some agents, an astronomer, and a lost kid that actually met aliens in 1961, where they proceeded to use the Earth as a place for refugees ever since. Naturally, James thinks Kay is crazy and thanks him for his time, but is left speechless again after Kay gets a cup of coffee from the lovable worm guys. There's a quick reference when Kay is leveling to James about how many aliens are on Earth. When Kay tells him there's about 1,500 aliens, James asks if there are any cab drivers. It seems innocuous at first, but in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, the character Ford Perfect writes that cab driving in New York is a great job for extraterrestrials inhabiting our planet and hoping to escape notice. James asks Kay what's the catch to all this, and he tells him that he'll sever contact with everyone and it will be as if he never existed. Then with a mix of curiosity and confusion on his face, James asks Kay if it's worth it, and he says that it is if you're strong enough. We briefly check in with Edgar, who's making his way to New York City, but his van seems rather damaged on top for some reason. James returns to the MiaB headquarters only to find Kay waiting for him in the elevator, and as they descend, James accepts the offer, but makes it clear that they chose him for his skills and he's not to be called things like kid or sport. Then Kay says, "Sure thing, Slick," but all his skills are meaningless here. Then the elevator doors open, revealing the sprawling headquarters filled with advanced technology and aliens. There's a couple quick jokes when Kay is showing James around. James bumps into this ball that bounces just absolutely everywhere, and when Kay catches it, he says this is a joke from the Great Attractor, which is a real mysterious phenomenon out in space, which is causing this huge supercluster of galaxies, which affects the gravity of other galaxies around it, including our own. And next we see a bunch of aliens that are being monitored, and we see a bunch of celebrities on there, and my favorite, of course, is Danny DeVito. Zed then tells James it's time for the last step, to put on the last suit he's ever gonna wear. He's officially wiped from all records, he dons the black suit, and James officially becomes Agent J. Checking back in with Edgar, he continues to be super normal while he follows a businessman with a cat all the way from his jewelry store to a restaurant. The businessman meets his suspiciously tall friend, and he's warned that they must flee because a bug has followed him to this planet. But the danger is closer than they could know when Edgar drops off their pierogies with a heaping sight of cockroaches, of course revealing him to be the bug. Knowing his time is up, the business alien tells Edgar that they can kill him, but they won't find the galaxy. Edgar does indeed bring them to a swift end and takes the container while fleeing from the loyal kitty cat. Vincent D'Onofrio described his character as being angry and frustrated that he even has to wear this suit. Some of the ways they used to achieve his weird look was by making him walk with braces, taping his ankles down, and then gluing his eyelids down too. And he said it was quite painful. The director even added some insult to injury, saying that he spends about 6 hours a day in makeup to look almost normal. Back at the office, Zed assigns J and K's first assignment as a team, and it seems like a simple run-of-the-mill boundary violation. This alien isn't supposed to leave Manhattan, yet he's in Jersey, and they need to find out why. On the drive over, J can't believe how they have all kinds of alien tech, yet they drive such a simple Ford, and K is abrasive as always and has no response, but does tell J to never touch the red button. Arriving at the boundary violation, it's anything but normal. Kay leaves Jay to handle the frantic woman literally in the middle of labor while he talks to the dad off to the side. The delivery takes an unpredictable turn after Jay is lashed around by giant tentacles. All the while, Kay learns that they were simply leaving because they didn't like the neighborhood anymore, and the interrogation ends when Jay finally finishes delivering the baby squid thing. Kay knows it would take something big to cause them to leave, then to Jay's amazement, they get a lead about the alien's activity from a supermarket tabloid. It reads, "An alien stole my husband's skin." I'll give you 3 guesses who. Under the guise of FBI agents, they go over to Edgar's farm and interview his wife Beatrice. The squid delivery scene was the scene I tuned in on when I first watched this movie, and I remember just being wildly confused by it and really the rest of the movie until I watched the beginning just years later. She says that none of the local authorities believed her, and she repeats the events surrounding the original Edgar's demise. When she gets to the part about sugar water, Kay has heard enough, and he neuralizes her with a flimsy story about swamp gas and a weather balloon, but Jay thinks they can do better. Then Kay walks out while Jay is coming up with an increasingly complex backstory for her to be better off without Edgar. Outside of the crash site, the soil samples confirm Kay's worst fears. A bug is here. To put things into perspective, Kay grimly says that a bug means the morgue is their next best lead in the investigation. Over at the morgue, the victims of the bug's recent attacks are being wheeled in along with the cat still protecting his owner instead of being with Animal Protection Services for some reason. Laurel begins the autopsy only to find impossible results like the body getting warmer and missing internal organs. Then Jay and Kay show up, now posing as officials from the Department of Public Health, and ask to see the victims. Jay goes with Laurel, and it's painfully obvious to her that he has no clue what he's doing, but they both have a fading recollection of the other, almost like deja vu. Of course, we know they were both neuralized after Jay's foot chase earlier. Jay steps away to discreetly talk with his partner, but after just a few moments, Laurel is shouting for Jay. She notices something strange on the body's ear, and when Jay touches it, it reveals a tiny alien on his death throes was piloting the body. With the rest of his strength, his last words are, "To prevent war, the galaxy is on Orion's belt." Jay blows their cover even more when he forgets Kay's alias when he calls him over for an update. Unfortunately, Kay recognizes the alien as a member of the royal family of the Archelians, and even worse yet, the cryptic last words puzzle him too. Kay uses the Amnesia Blaster 5000 on Laurel a couple more times for good measure, and the two agents leave as special services show up to clean up the scene. Another quick check-in with Edgar, he breaks open the container he stole earlier and is disappointed to find it only contains diamonds. Bummer, huh? Back at HQ, Zed has some bad news for Jay. He shows him Orion's belt and explains how it's only 3 stars and can't possibly hold a galaxy, and he must have misheard those final words. Then Jay interrupts Kay, who was seemingly watching someone from his past life on a computer. Connecting the dots, Jay guesses that he was the lost kid when they first made contact, which means she was the lost girl that never got those flowers, and Kay confirms it all. Zed calls them both over to show how many other aliens have also been trying to flee recently, but Kay finds out why when he instructs the monitors to find a warship from the Archelians ominously hovering over the Earth. Zed sends them off to the tiny alien's jewelry store for any leads, but tells Kay to finally give Jay a weapon. But the weapon he gets is a tiny little gun that puts the fear of God into Kay for some reason. Edgar's a step ahead because he's already smashing the jewelry store looking for the galaxy. He pauses to study an old photo of a man with his beloved cat, but is pulled away when he hears his truck being towed. Edgar waddles over to stop the tow, but it's at this point the men in black arrive. They also notice the shrine to the cat and spring into action once they hear Edgar opening fire. Jay quickly shoots his tiny gun, and it's surprisingly powerful enough to send him flying back several feet. He tries and fails to stop Edgar again before he can drive off the tow truck, but at least Jay manages to detach the exterminator truck with UFO in the back. After getting away, Edgar shakes down a street vendor to find out where we keep our dead, and he tells him the morgue. But he has no more questions, so I guess he knows what a morgue is, but not where we keep our dead. Anyway, Zed calls Kay from HQ and updates them that the Archelians are holding the men in black responsible for everything with the message that they return the galaxy. Feeling a little desperate at this point, Kay goes and talks to this weird-looking alien who's selling newspapers. Psych, the pug is actually the alien and his name is Frank. After a dash of animal abuse, Frank spills the beans that somehow a marble-sized galaxy is hidden here on Earth and the bug wants it as an unlimited subatomic power source to wipe out the Archelians, and probably us too, I'd speculate. Kay is perplexed, but gets one step closer, stating that the galaxy is not on the constellation like they thought. Then after studying Frank barking at a nearby cat, Jay pieces the rest of the mystery together. Back at the morgue, Laurel is toiling away at her desk when the tiny alien's cat jumps in her way. It's here she confirms Jay's suspicions and is mystified by the galaxy on the collar of the cat named Orion. But Orion senses danger nearby and hides as Edgar shows up trying to claim him. The dude manning the counter makes the mistake of swatting some flies in front of Edgar, so he's quickly dealt with. Then Edgar goes to the back and holds Laurel hostage, demanding she give him the cat. The men in black follow shortly behind, and Kay allows Jay a couple of minutes solo so they don't have to keep neuralizing the poor woman. But Jay fumbles the situation hard when he confuses Laurel's hints and gestures as flirting instead of genuine signs of danger. Kay enters and finds the other employee cocooned on the ceiling and barges in the back just as Orion jumps out and is snatched up by Edgar. Using his alien strength, he takes both Laurel and the galaxy and gets away in a stolen taxi, then tells her to drive him to a place in a photo. Back at HQ, Zed informs the duo that the Archelians are still threatening the Earth and continuing to demand that they deliver the galaxy. In the making of, Linda Fiorentino, who plays Laurel, said that when she met with director Barry Sonnenfeld, he warned her that there would be no nudity, and he thought that she might not want the part. But she just laughed her ass off while telling the story. Must be some reputation, huh? Kay points out that they're in a stalemate of sorts. While Edgar has the galaxy, he can't leave because they have his ship from the exterminator van, so Kay makes sure to monitor all the ships in New York. However, the situation worsens as the Archelians advance their threats. Deliver the galaxy or Earth will be destroyed within 1 galactic week. Or, 1 hour here. Then once again, while everyone else seems lost, Jay knows where to go after studying the mural of the old UFOs hidden in the Flushing Meadows Corona Park. Of course, Jay totally nailed the guess, and when Edgar gets there, he makes sure to bring Laurel along as a boat snack for later. Then the men in black are maxing out their old Ford down the highway, but with no time left to spare, Kay tells Jay to finally hit that red button. He does, just as they're about ready to smash into a Jeep, but the car turns into a small jet, allowing them to fly upside down above everybody. Another day in the office for Kay, though. With 8 minutes left on the clock, they arrive just as the ship starts to take off, and this calls for the big guns. They blast it down and it crashes back in front of them. Still another day in the office for Kay. Not willing to admit defeat, Edgar emerges and reveals his true form as a gigantic cockroach monster. He swallows the agent's guns, then knocks them aside. Then Kay gives Jay an order not to let the bug get to the second ship, and then does something crazy. He says he's getting his gun back and then provokes Edgar to eat him. Meanwhile, Laurel has gotten away during all the action, and she's watching as Jay hopelessly tries to keep Edgar from boarding that second ship. Nothing Jay does seems to faze Edgar until he's knocked against an old dumpster, causing a bunch of roaches to spill out. Like with the exterminator and the guy at the morgue, Edgar can't help but to defend his fellow insects, and he comes back to stop Jay from crushing them. Jay holds his ground, taunting the bug until a charging noise indicates that Kay has finally found his gun, blowing Edgar up from the inside. They call off the Archelians, then, while reflecting over a job well done, Edgar makes one more surprise attack, but Laurel is the one to end him with Jay's gun. Outside HQ, Kay breaks out the neuralizer, but to Jay's surprise, Kay says it's for himself, not Laurel. Like his partner D in the beginning, Kay takes a moment with Jay to appreciate how beautiful the stars really are before confessing that he hasn't been training a partner, he's been training a replacement. Jay starts to protest, but Kay says that he has a lifetime of memories that he'd rather not have. He tells Jay how to use the neuralizer, and then for the first time in the entire movie, Kay calls him by his name, saying, "See you around, Jay." But Jay's last words to his dear friend are the sad truth that no, he won't, before neuralizing him too. The only evidence of their adventure being the tabloids, where they have stories on a flying car, a UFO, and even a man miraculously waking from a 35-year coma. Then Jay and Elle drive off into New York as we zoom out to see our galaxy is nothing but a marvel for beings far beyond our understanding. Alright, that was Men in Black. I hope you enjoyed it. It's definitely a fan favorite movie. But next up is a personal favorite movie in Seven Psychopaths. Not a lot of people have seen it, so hope you enjoy the antics of Colin Farrell, Sam Rockwell, and Christopher Walken. As a quick note, just wanted to say it's storming really bad here, so if there's any noise in the background, I apologize for that. But we begin with two mid to high level mobsters waiting around on a running path, sharing horror stories and talking about their current job. They're too engrossed in their conversation to see a masked figure approach from the distance and take them both out, leaving a couple of Jack of Diamonds playing cards. We're already introduced to Psycho number 1. Sometime later, Marty wakes up next to some empty liquor bottles and a voicemail telling him to get a move on with his screenplay. His girlfriend Kaya is trying to get through her morning routine when Billy drops by to see Marty. She clearly isn't a fan of him and tries to send him off saying Marty's writing today, but Billy's unbothered and sees him anyway. He and Marty start talking about Billy's issues as a struggling actor, but Kaya's heard enough of all this and coldly tells Marty that she's going to work. Billy has some not-so-choice words for her as she leaves. The friends are seeing a movie later, and Billy continues on his tirade about Kaya, but Marty defends her, and he says he's not taking relationship advice from him. And on an unrelated note, Marty asks Billy how's the dog kidnapping business going, and Billy has to correct him saying it's a dog borrowing business. We see the whole scheme go down. Billy scopes a dog, steals the dog, waits for a reward flyer to go up, and his partner Hans returns the dog for the money. That is just evil, but after this job, Hans goes to the cancer ward to visit his old lady and drop off his recent score, but she doesn't really approve of his stealing and wants him to get an honest job. He reminds her that he hasn't worked an honest job for the last 20 years, so this is the best he's got. Catching up with Marty, Billy asks him how his new screenplay, The Seven Psychopaths, is coming along, and while this conversation seems innocuous at first, it's actually crucial to how the rest of the movie unfolds. Marty confesses that it's not going well. He only has one, and it's a pacifist Buddhist psychopath at that. Marty wants to go against the grain by not leaning into those Hollywood stereotypes of murderous, gun-toting psychos, and he wants to make it about peace overall instead. But he's in a bind because it still does have to be about seven psychopaths. Just then, Billy remembers something that he read in the paper today, and he shows him the headlines about Psycho number 1, now being called the Jack of Diamonds killer. But this guy isn't an ordinary serial killer, no, he has integrity, because he only goes after the mid to high level mobsters. Marty thanks him for the great find and asks Billy if he can keep it, but Billy says he can if he lets him help write the movie. Then he reads the room and says, that was just a joke. Later on, Marty is workshopping his Buddhist psycho and he lands on a Quaker psycho and narrates his backstory. The Quaker's daughter went missing and was found with her neck slashed. The killer couldn't bear it, so on the anniversary of her death, he turned himself in, seeking death, but the judge granted him life instead. 17 years passed and he found religion, but this story isn't about him. The Quaker watched from the outside. He was eventually released and lived a simple life, but he was still haunted by the Quaker after 11 years. Then after reading the only way to guarantee a place in hell was by taking your own life, he slit his own throat. But the last thing the man ever saw was the Quaker take out his own razor and slice. Of course, Psycho number 2. Some mobsters are in the middle of an interrogation with dog walker Charisse when the leader, Charlie, comes in ready for blood since she lost his precious dog, Bonnie. Sound familiar? 3 guesses. He doesn't believe anything she says and goes to shoot her, but his gun jams. She takes the time to plead with Charlie, but he thinks it's low that she's going to take advantage of his jammed gun. Then one of his guys says that he got a tip about a dog napping thing going on around, but he didn't say anything because he was after Charisse all night. Charlie makes his guy go follow up on that, but Charisse still lost his dog, so bang! Just kidding, he lets her go. Psycho number 3. According to IMDb, since writer-director Martin McDonagh's first draft of the film, the dog's name was Bonnie, then the Shih Tzu they found at Player was actually named Bonnie in real life. Wow. Checking in with Hans real quick. He's in the middle of a conversation with Myra, and they're pondering the questions of life. Will they see Wendy again? Is there really an afterlife? You know, things like that. But Hans's faith is unshaken, and he reassures his wife and holds her close as they await the results. Billy is getting ready for this big party tonight for Kaya when, no points for guessing, he had Bonnie all along, but she does not seem interested in doing the ball handshake trick. At the party, Billy rolls his eyes at Marty as he finishes telling the Quaker a story. Marty takes a jab at Billy, saying that he should have asked him to help write it. With a friendly voice, Billy says that maybe Marty's just drinking a bit too much. Marty, of course, takes that personally and things start to escalate until Kaya gets in the middle of it. Marty stomps off, but Billy tells Kaya that he was actually the one that told Marty that story about the Quaker 2 months ago at the bar, so there could be some copyright issues at least. Marty drinks the night away, and we revisit the Buddhist psycho, now officially Psychopath number 4. He spins the revolver in his hotel room, and a topless escort emerges from the bathroom, but he stows the gun away for now. In his native tongue, he talks about how he wants revenge for what America did to his country, and in an incredibly ditzy voice, she asks, "Is he speaking Chinese?" He corrects her and snips at it's Vietnamese. In an even ditzier voice this time, she asks, "Didn't we go to war with you guys once?" He confirms yes, and says, "It isn't over." Marty wakes up on Billy's couch to some Bonnie kisses, and naturally he wants to know why he's there. Billy reminds him that Kaya threw him out last night for calling her a bee in front of all of her friends, but he does not believe that he would have done that, so he calls her, and yeah, she definitely confirms it. The two of them go to Billy's place of business, if you can call it that, and Billy continues to press his friend's buttons about his drinking. The Spanish have bullfighting, the French have cheese, and the Irish have alcoholism. What about the Americans? Marty asks. Tolerance, Billy answers. Hey, y'all drink to that, but Marty is going through the papers, and Billy notices he's about to get to the LA Weekly, and he starts to act super nervous and comes up with an obviously fake excuse to get out of there. On his way out, he says that Marty might be mad, but he tried to help him with an ad. We see the ad, and it reads, "Calling all psychopaths, share your story, you might be in a movie." The mobsters are tailing Hans as he finishes one of his dog scams, and they pull him into the car to figure out where the rest of the dogs are. He caves pretty quickly, and before Marty can even process anything, the goons have showed up with guns in his face asking where the Shih Tzu is. He says that he knows, but Hans takes his time to tell Marty that whether or not he does know, have some faith in the Lord and pride in yourself to not tell these bad guys anything. He's gonna spill the beans, but these mid to high level mobsters have a terrible matchup against Jack the Diamonds, who shows up just in time to take them out. Then he walks off like business as usual. Hans and Marty burst into Billy's house to tell him what happened, but he couldn't be more surprised by all this because it all happened in like the 10 minutes he was gone. Hans sees Bonnie being a good dog, and he puts everything together that the three of them have to leave and talk about their next steps. Billy has my vote when he says that they should team up with Jack of Diamonds, but Marty shoots that down, saying that they need to go to the cops. Hans shuts that down even harder and says that he needs to go check on Myra. He was going to be there for the results. Billy fills Marty in that she just had surgery for cancer. And speaking of Myra, the mobsters are searching around the dog hideout, and they come across some breadcrumbs that lead them right to the hospital where she's recovering. Marty and Billy are heading home when they discover a peculiar-looking fellow holding a rabbit. He introduces himself as Zachariah, and he's actually responding to the Psychopath advertisement. Zachariah is actually played by Tom Waits, who agreed to this role without ever reading the script. He's just an animal lover and was told that he'd have a rabbit the whole time. Anyways, they hesitantly invite him inside, but right when they get there, Billy bails on Marty again with another lousy excuse, and he leaves them with a voice-activated tape recorder. Wow, thanks Billy. Trying to get this over with, he tells Zach just to say what he has to say, and when he does start it, it begins as a really long-winded, drawn-out story. But then he gets to a part about saving a chained-up black girl from an evil judge, and he says it was love at first sight. Her name was Maggie, and the two lovebirds became serial killers. So this is getting juicy now. Marty takes out his notebook and starts to listen to this tale. He goes on this rapid-fire series of killers they ended. The Texarkana Moonlight Murder of 1947, the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, 1954, and of course the Zodiac of 1975. Over the years, Zach had become more and more disillusioned with Maggie's brutality, and that night was too much for him. She gave him back the ring, and all he had left was his new pet bunny to watch her drive away into the distance. The Zodiac was actually a real unsolved killer who was active in California in the 1970s. In the movie, Zach and Maggie were able to solve the mystery and take him out.
You can confirm it's the same one by all the zodiac symbols in his house.
He finishes his tale by telling Marty he's been looking for her ever since, and all he wants for the use of his story is for Marty to put a message for her at the end. Marty is floored by this story and promises on his life to leave that message at the end. Zach is overjoyed by this promise, and after he leaves, Marty notes Psychopaths number 5 and 6. Charlie follows right up on the hospital lead and goes up to Myra's room looking for a Mrs. Koslowski, but she has a couple of things going for her here. One, she's in a room with 2 hospital beds and Charlie doesn't know what she looks like. Remember, this is about a decade before our current digital age. For a while, she manages to tiptoe around his questioning, but Charlie eventually pieces together who she is. She looks out the window and sees Hans on his way up for his daily visit, and in an effort to save him, she doesn't give him up, and Charlie does something unthinkable. Charlie is practically fuming on his way out, and it's just as Hans is about to walk in with Myra's flowers. Hans can read the situation, so instead of going in, he keeps walking down the hallway. He later comes back and confirms the tragedy that he had suspected. He finds Charlie later on in a waiting room and sits down to look him in the eye. Charlie comments on his neckwear, and Hans gives him a coy smile and removes it, saying it's a cravat, and offers it to him. But what's that underneath? Oh, it's a huge scar. Charlie is understandably freaked out, and he bounces. We get to see what Billy's been up to this whole time, and it turns out he's been secretly seeing Charlie's girlfriend. He admits to her that he tried to do her a solid by dog-napping Bonnie because that was the only thing that Charlie ever talked about, and he was obsessed with that dog. She panics and calls Charlie, but Billy gets a call too. It's Hans and Marty, and they're checking on him since he's been out so late, and in the most matter-of-fact way possible, Hans breaks the news of what Charlie did to Myra. All bets are off, so Billy walks over to his lover, and while she's still on the phone, he places something in her hand and shoots her in the stomach. He takes the phone and makes sure that she gets an ambulance, though. Yep, he is Psychopath number 7. But the thing that he placed in her hands? Oh, that was the Jack of Diamonds, meaning he is, in fact, also Psycho number 1. So, cards on the table. Now that we know Billy is crazy, now's a good time to mention that Sam Rockwell said that he was inspired by Kathy Bates in Misery, Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver, and Timothy Treadwell from the documentary The Grizzly Man. He described him as being lost and vulnerable. Tragic. Marty is just waiting around for Billy to get back home, and he notices a book affectionately titled Billy's Secret Diary, Keep Out You Pigs. In the book, Billy journals a pretty lonely series of thoughts. He watched a flag all day, and he tried not to burn the flag, but he did anyways. He also wrote about trying to become a better friend and not bothering Marty so much about 7 psychopaths. He'll ask for help if he wants it. Billy finally shows up, and they all hit the road, but Charlie's just one step behind them, and he shows up at Billy's house. While looking around, Charlie's guys notice a bunch of packs of playing cards laying around, all missing the Jack of Diamonds. Cat is out of the bag now. Hans is passed out in the back, and Marty is shocked at how stoic he's been lately considering all the recent events. Billy says that he's just like that, he's an old school Christian. Marty takes a page from Billy's book and makes an effort to become a better friend as well, and wants to ask Billy to help him write the movie. And not only that, he's going to stop drinking until it's done. Billy says it's a deal, but Marty points out that there's no deal, but Billy thinks it's great anyways. Marty is sitting alone with Hans at a bar while Billy is getting another round, and Marty delicately gives Hans his condolences about Myra, saying at least she's in heaven now. Hans asks him if he believes in heaven, and he wants Marty to tell him one of his religious stories. Marty goes on to tell him the story of the Quaker, but Billy gets back right before the end, and he tries to change the subject, but it's too late. Hans insists that he finishes the story, and when Marty does, he reveals the scar that we saw earlier. The trio are on the road again to hide out in the desert, and Hans gives Marty a few pointers on his story and contemplates the years that he spent getting revenge. He isn't so sure that it was worth it after all, and he believes what Gandhi said about an eye for an eye. Billy thinks on that for a second though, and points out that there is indeed actually going to be one guy left with just one eye, and he can just run and hide in a bush. Checkmate, Gandhi. This is exactly the stuff that Marty is trying to write about, so he asks Hans for his help, and that stings Billy more than just a little bit. Their dichotomy is on full display when Billy thinks this movie should be violent because it's about 7 freaking psychopaths. Marty again wants to go against the grain and thinks the movie should set up for a typical violent end but then resolve peacefully instead. Billy could not disagree more. They drive past what Billy would deem a perfect spot for a shootout, and they eventually set up in the desert. Hans tells Marty that he read the screenplay, but his biggest note that he is terrible at writing women. They basically all get shot or they can't string together more than 2 sentences. But Hans is intrigued by the Vietnamese psycho when Marty narrates his backstory. This guy isn't even a priest. Marty just really liked that image, but in fact he's a ruthless soldier who found out that the US killed his family when he returned from war. He is on the path of revenge whenever he plans to plant bombs on the escort and send her into a veterans convention. It's too dark for Marty, so he never finished writing that story. Then, in so many words, which would draw too much ire today, Billy suggested they should change the name of the movie to 7 Friends Who Hold Hands and Sing Kumbaya instead. Colin Farrell and Sam Rockwell actually found that silly-looking bear hat while they were making the movie in a truck stop. They both decided that Billy should be the one to wear it. The 3 of them then go on to spend the day workshopping the script in their own ways. Marty seems to be stuck in his own head, Hans uses the tape recorder and shares his thoughts, and Billy imagines shootouts. And speaking of shootouts, Billy gathers his friends that night to set the stage to narrate his shootout. Exterior cemetery. Night. The Jack of Diamonds is there to return Bonnie because all he wants is peace, but he is outgunned because he thought the mob boss would show up alone and unarmed. Marty chimes in to point out that the Jack should have known better, but Billy thinks on his feet and says, "Exactly! His friends were hiding nearby to help. Even the Vietnamese guy is here." Marty is even there, and tragedy strikes when Kaya shows up and dies. Yeah, things are just all over the place at this point, but the serial killers show up and they're the next to go, but their bunny gets away because, quote, "You can't let the animals die in the movie, just the women," end quote. Then Jack dies, leaving only Marty and Hans to face off against the crazy Charlie. But Jack wasn't dead at all. He had a crossbow up his sleeve and he takes out Charlie. Jack dies in Marty's arms, but Marty's proud of what Jack did. Then the camera cuts to a sky so blue it suggests that there could be peace. The quote earlier about not letting animals die was a reference to the original ending of the film that the boards had to change to not let Bonnie die. And there's also a gravestone that reads Rourke, since Mickey Rourke was originally going to play Charlie, but that was recast since he had issues with director Martin McDonagh. In front of Billy, Marty and Hans do their best to not totally trash the scene, but when they're alone on their way to a convenience store, they tear it apart. But on their way back, something catches Marty's eye in the paper. It's a picture of Billy with the headlines connecting him to the Jack of Diamonds. When they get back, the two are clearly on edge. Marty has fallen off the wagon, and in his signature no-nonsense attitude, Hans asks Billy for the peyote. Marty interrupts their rather interesting conversation that follows to address what they read in the paper earlier. Then, without any explanation, Hans just walks off into the desert with a look of determination. Marty apologizes to Billy for being a bad friend and rips the band-aid off and asks him, why did you kill all those people? At first, Billy gaslights him into thinking he told him way back at the party, but he was just kidding. Marty just caught him off guard. He actually just wants Marty to think about his drinking a little bit. What? Definitely Psycho number 7. And 1, I guess. Marty is ready to throw in the towel on the whole thing, and he goes to check on Hans, who's beside himself, having a vision of Myra in some great place with her gunshot wound. Wanting to deal with this after he comes down a little bit, Marty tries to take him back to the car when, boom, suddenly it explodes. Billy had a genius idea to force the ending he wants by calling Charlie in exchange for Bonnie so they can do a proper shootout. They could just look for the smoking car. Marty has had enough at this point, so he punches Billy for putting them in this spot. Then Hans criticizes Marty's behavior. Marty says that he's not going to be lectured by the guy that just called a psycho killer and the guy who started doubting his lifelong religious beliefs due to some visions he saw from a cactus. Billy sets aside Marty's rant for now and asks Hans what Marty meant by that. Hans shares what he saw last night, and we get our once per episode nat 20 charisma roll. Billy convinces him that he actually went out there last night and said a bunch of random things in Myra's voice, like it was all gray and stuff. Hans looks him deep in the eyes, and without saying a word, he walks off into the distance. Billy is waiting around for Charlie to show up, and Marty joins him so the two friends can finally make amends. Billy warns him that he should walk away like Hans if he really isn't going to fight, but Marty wants to see this through to the end. Eventually, Charlie shows up alone and unarmed, but Billy doesn't buy it, so he tells him to turn around and lift his coat. Charlie does just that, but then bang, he gets shot in the back for his troubles. Billy searches him and can't believe that he doesn't have a gun. He feels like Charlie is ruining his final shootout, but aha, he isn't unarmed at all because he finds a flare gun. Hans is continuing to walk through the desert when he happens upon Charlie's men waiting nearby, but he isn't playing any of their games. Charlie's right-hand man holds up a huge shotgun demanding that Hans puts his hands up, but to his confusion, Hans simply refuses. He says he doesn't want to and he doesn't care about that guy's guns, and he's not gonna give up his friends either. The mobster can't believe it, but Hans just says, that's too bad. But a couple of cops happen to pull in nearby, and as a side note, this entire scene was improvised by Christopher Walken. What a legend. Meanwhile, Marty has loaded Charlie up in his car because he just can't let him bleed out. Billy continues to taunt Charlie as they leave, but he's still confused about the flare gun being all he brought. But then he pieces it together and fires it into the sky. Hans and all the goons see it go off and they start to load up and head that way, but he reads the situation and wants to help his friends. So he does a Gran Torino and pretends to pull out a gun only to get shot so the cops get involved. Rest in peace, Hans. Marty and Charlie don't get very far when they run into the mobsters who tell them about the cops and Hans. Charlie then reveals he was actually just grazed and he leads everyone to go get his beloved Bonnie back. On the way through the desert, Marty comments that this would be a perfect place for a shootout, and sure enough, Billy is up there and he takes out most of them. Charlie eventually holds Marty hostage and demands Billy throw his guns and brings Bonnie out. Billy does just what he says, but he forgot about the flare gun, so he still has Bonnie hostage. Billy tells his friend to leave, but Marty breaks it to him that he killed Hans and they have to leave now. Billy, with the utmost sincerity, reminds Marty that this movie only ends his way. Understanding that he's serious, Marty makes a break for the car and speeds off. Charlie takes aim and click! It's jammed, and Billy gives Charlie to the count of 5. He pleads for him not to shoot his dog and to go up to 5, but Billy won't do it. He just won't. Okay, he does it. He loves Bonnie too. 5, 4, 3, 2,
Bang! The gun gets unstuck as the cops arrive to see everything happen. Charlie is taken away, but Billy, still refusing to let go of his ending, gets Bonnie to finally do that paw trick and then passes on. On his way back, Marty sees what happened to Hans and he notices him holding that recorder labeled, "Marty, does this help?" He takes it and leaves, and on that recording we hear Hans's solution to the Vietnamese priest problem from earlier. He reframes the beginning mostly the same, but the escort is now much more educated and classy. She is now fully clothed and speaks fluent Vietnamese, but they still get it on, and during the act he says he smells gasoline and sets his plan in motion. They get to the convention and he pours gasoline, but just as he strikes the match he hears something. "Desist, brother, you know this will not help us." He's no longer in Phoenix, but now he's in the middle of a street in Saigon, 1963. Our history buffs know where this is going. He hears, "Desist, you know this will not help us" again, but this time it's from a fellow monk, and this time he has a response. It might. With all the anger purged from his heart, he sets himself ablaze in protest. Psycho number 2 is actually just the final thoughts of a man who chose peace in the end. Marty looks at the photos of his late friends and remembers their time together as he puts on the finishing touches for his screenplay, The 7 Psychopaths. He gives Bonnie a scratch and then sets off into the world. Roll credits. But what's that? Marty's at home and he gets a call. Turns out he forgot that promise he made with his life to Zach to put a message for Maggie at the end of his movie. Marty instantly realizes his mistake and wants to have the credits changed, but oh no, it's too late for that. Zach is going to drop by and unalive him on Tuesday. Marty seems to just accept his fate at this point, and sensing all the loss and pain in his voice, Zach says that Tuesday's not good for him and he's actually going to have to reschedule their unaliving. He hangs up the phone and walks away with his bunny.
That's a pretty crazy movie, huh? We're moving from one hidden gem to the next in Pitch Black. This is the movie that kicked off Vin Diesel's career and saved Fast and Furious. Stick around to the end to figure out how. A ship slowly crawls along some distant part of the universe as it approaches cosmic debris of some kind. They say most of your brain shuts down in cryosleep, all but the animal side. At least Riddick assumes that's why he's still awake, being transported with the civilians. He's overheard a holy man, Imam, probably on his way to New Mecca. There's a woman who seems to be a prospector, and the others who seem to be free settlers. But his real problem is Johns, the guy who's taken him back to the prison world. They're taking a low-profile route back, but that leaves a lot of time for things to go wrong. Suddenly, debris starts decimating the ship, and unfortunately, the captain doesn't make it. The other two officers, Fry and Owens, are awoken from their cryosleep for damage control. They try to assess the situation and hail for rescue for them and their 40 passengers, but it's too late. They're already entering the orbit of a nearby planet. Fry can't regain control of the ship, so all she can think to do is detach the other compartments. As she prepares to detach the passengers, some start to wake up and Johns even frees himself to survey the situation. Owens reminds Fry that they're still responsible for the lives of everyone here, but she still tries to Yoshi the passengers to save herself. Owens was able to override her, but at the cost of controlling the ship because they crash.
So that ship is actually still there in the Australian mining town of Coober Pedy, where most of this movie was filmed. Some other notable movies filmed there were Mad Max 3, Mortal Kombat, and Kangaroo Jack.
The survivors try to orient themselves, and Johns goes looking for the missing prisoner. We already see just how dangerous he is whenever, even while chained up, he nearly takes Johns out from above. But the ambush is short-lived as Johns knocks Riddick out. Everyone else continues to open pods looking for other survivors like Jack, but Fry soon sees that Owens has suffered a fatal injury. He wakes up shouting, "Don't touch that handle," and Fry yells for some morphine, but it's quickly pointed out that it was lost in the crash. So she clears out the room so she can let her crewmate pass on what little peace she can grant him. After taking in their totally alien surroundings, the survivors gather on top of the wreck to thank Fry for saving them with the emergency landing. Fry goes on to check on the prisoner, and John fills her in that he's locked up because he escaped from a maximum security prison. For now, they're just going to keep him chained up for everyone's safety. Meanwhile, the antiquities dealer Paris is able to recover his booze and spirits that he's stashed in a sarcophagus. Everyone seems relieved, except Imam, whose religion dictates that he can't partake, but he's not worried about it. But while everyone is celebrating, Riddick dislocates his shoulder and escapes.
Both in the original script and the game Escape from Butcher Bay, Imam practices a blended religion called Krishlam. And for those who are unaware, this franchise takes place about 500 years in the future, and Imam is more or less another word for priest. Sorry for any mispronunciations.
It doesn't take long for Johns to realize Riddick has escaped, and everyone starts gearing up to find him. Johns leads the search with his tactical gear, but everyone else is armed with more primitive weaponry from Paris's collection. While they're searching, Johns thinks he hears something, but it must have been the wind. But while he's looking out, he notices some trees, which means there must be water. Back at the ship, Paris is a lookout for Riddick, while Zeke is tasked with dragging the deceased away from camp. The search team makes their way over to the trees that John spotted, and when they arrive, they see it's actually a massive graveyard. They start to look around and begin pondering what could have done something like this to all the life on this planet.
During the search, Johns gets a moment alone to ask Fry about why Johns was shouting about the handle when he woke up. They aren't alone as they think, though, because Riddick is hiding in the shadows nearby, and he overhears her confessing that she wanted to detach everybody, but Owen stopped her. On the way back, the kids in the search party notice some human artifacts in the sand, and they follow it to an abandoned station nearby. It's there that they discover a machine used for extracting water, and Fry finds an orrery that visualizes a 3-sun cycle, leaving them in perpetual daylight. That's not all she finds, though. There's a small ship there, too. It's too bad the shells are shot, but Fry thinks they might be able to get it running again. Back at the crash site, Paris hears some banging noises, so he checks on the others below when he hears it again. Suddenly, someone is rapidly approaching them, and Jack thinks it's Riddick, so as he approaches, Shaza nearly ends him. Thankfully, it was just a survivor, but oh no! Zeke still takes him out thinking it was Riddick. And meanwhile, Riddick's just chilling in the background watching all the chaos. On an unrelated note, Zeke now has another body to add to the graveyard nearby where Riddick is hiding, but this time he gets curious about what's inside one of the holes and he takes a look. With no warning at all, he's dragged inside and desperately fires away. The survivors hear the shots and come running, but when they get there, all that's left is a bloody entrance to an underground cavern. Riddick is also there investigating when Shaza spots him with a knife in hand. Riddick tries to go back into hiding, but as he's running, John trips him and takes him back into the ship as a prisoner once again. In the brief exchange, Riddick loses his goggles and we see that he's nearly blinded through his point of view without them. Back in the ship, Fry interrogates Riddick about Zeke, but he doesn't fall for any of her intimidation. Riddick confesses that he usually takes everyone's fear as a compliment, but this time it isn't him that she has to worry about. Then either by his reputation or her curiosity or both, she wants to see his eyes, so he lures her in just close enough for a jump scare. Sorry, headphones user.
Okay, so Riddick Vision is cool and all, but Vin Diesel described them as hubcaps. They were prototypes, and whenever they first used them for filming, they had to call an optometrist from over 3 hours away to get them off. Yikes.
Jack is eavesdropping nearby and wants to know how you get a pair of those eyes. Riddick explains the only way to get them is by going to a prison where you never see daylight and you dig up a surgeon to do a shine job. Whatever that means. They send Jack away and Riddick admits that, yeah, he's killed a couple of people, but he didn't kill Zeke. She doesn't believe him because he wasn't in that cave, but he says to look deeper. What could go wrong, right? The crew secure Fry with a harness and watch her enter the bloody cavern. As she crawls deeper, she quickly finds herself in a large open space with rays of light beaming through. She investigates one to realize the rock spires on the surface are hollow, and while she's looking, she nearly spots something on the wall behind her. She continues carefully studying the cave until she finds a severed leg, confirming Zeke's fate. It's here that she realizes the cavern is full of creatures, and she quickly tries to climb the spire. The monsters pull down on her cable as she screams for help, and Jack hears something. Fry is nearly a goner, but then Pix bursts through the wall. The crew saves her. She screams what she saw on there, but she's pulled back again, but this time they cut her cable. Johns understands the gravity of the situation and goes back to their prisoner. Riddick correctly guesses that they found something worse than him after all and assumes that they want his help, but he'll still go back to prison. But Johns has a sweeter offer. He says that he'll report Riddick died in the crash because, frankly, he's tired of chasing him at this point. Riddick recommends that Johns just ends him now because that's what he would do. But John fires around, freeing him, and tells Riddick, "I want you to remember how this could have gone," and didn't. He hands back the goggles, and Riddick uses his lightning-fast speed to take the shotgun and repeat John's words back to him, but he doesn't pull the trigger. They take one of the crash ship's cells to test with the other ship, and they all start heading there. It's here we get Riddick's full name. Paris drops a bottle, and Riddick happens to grab it, and naturally, he's gonna chug it, and when they introduce themselves, Riddick says his name is Richard B. Riddick. Looking online, his full name is Richard Bruno Riddick. That's right. Dick B. Riddick. They get to that remote base, and Fry figures they can probably get that ship running, but it's going to take more cells from the other ship. Shaza might be able to get some of the loading equipment running again, but if not, at least Riddick is here to help. Speaking of Riddick, he begins to explore the base when Jack stalks him dressed like a little bootleg version of him, but who am I to judge? He finds some more artifacts in the sand and wants to look inside a nearby building, but it's locked. That doesn't stop one of the kids from entering, and right afterwards, Johns calls Riddick to join them. Then, just to make sure Jack doesn't think he's being too slick, Riddick throws a tarp back to reveal him.
Vin Diesel actually pulled a muscle on set during this scene because nobody told him that the tarp was tied down on the other side. Oops.
Everyone gathers inside because they got the water operational again, and Imam thanks Allah for the gift. They speculate as to what happened to the researchers, but Riddick doesn't entertain the conversation for long before he delivers the cold truth that the same things that killed Zeke also killed them. He points out all the signs that they left in a hurry and reminds them that they wouldn't have prepped a small emergency ship if there wasn't an emergency. Fry agrees with that grim assessment, but before they get a chance to speculate any further, Imam returns looking for the little one, Ollie. Richard suggests they go check the coring room. Sure enough, Ollie was the one that snuck into the locked room earlier, and when the station became operational again, the roof opened up, exposing a huge swarm of vicious creatures that attacked. He barely manages to escape into a dark room, but when he's inside, he hears something snarling within. Everyone else heard the commotion. They blast their way in past the locks and start looking for Ollie inside the coring room. Imam opens the same door and the swarm flies out. Everyone is able to hide quickly enough and the swarm retreats back into the tunnels. When Imam goes to look into the room though, he sees the gruesome fate that befell Ollie. In the depths of the tunnels, they finally discover the bodies of the researchers. They figure they probably went into the coring room because it had the heaviest doors, but they didn't expect an attack from underground. Fry looks around and notes the samples are dated 22 years ago. She takes a few moments to think on the dates, and when she's asked about it, she takes everybody back to the orrery. Upon winding the machine forward 22 years, they see the suns and planets aligned to cause a total eclipse. Wearing his goggles, Riddick mockingly asks if they're afraid of the dark. Understanding they likely don't have long, Fry tells Johns to go retrieve the cells, but he needs a word first. In private, Johns reveals Riddick was locked up for killing a pilot and stealing his ship, so Johns wants to time it so they can betray him right before takeoff. But Fry says that he hasn't actually caused any trouble yet, so they should just stick to the plan. But Mr. High and Mighty over here says he isn't letting Riddick repeat history on his watch. Riddick is right outside shaving, and he comments on how bad Johns is shaking. Johns quickly points out that they agree no shivs, but Riddick claims that this is just a personal grooming device. Sure it is. Then Riddick has his word in private with Fry, and he picks up on their plan to double-cross him. Riddick also has his own twist to reveal about Johns. He says that sure, he has that blue suit and that nickel slick badge, but he's only a merc, and he only wants to double-cross me because I'm worth double alive. She says that they're not going to turn on each other, but he admits that he does not know what's going to happen when the eclipse comes, but he does know that they are going to fall apart. Then, as a final note, he wonders if she's noticed John shakes, and then to ask him about why Owens died in such pain. She immediately goes to confront him and sees that he's finishing dosing himself with some morphine. He defends himself, saying that there's nothing wrong with his habit, but she screams there is a problem whenever he has all this and still lets Owen die that way. The teens come shouting in for Captain Fry, but she reminds them that she is not the captain. But she sees what they were panicked about. The planets are coming into place, and the eclipse is about to begin. It's now a race against the clock as their only truck is solar powered, so they gotta move. Everyone loads up and they speed over to the crashed ship for the remaining power cells. The threat of the eclipse looms overhead as the planets quickly rise into place. When they get to the crashed ship, Paris makes a risky move to go to his stash nearby while everyone else frantically loads the cells onto the truck. They suddenly run out of what little light they thought they had left as the rings of the rising planet cover the sun before the actual planet gets there. Shadows cover the surface as hordes of the creatures take flight from the spires. The bioraptors have entered the chat. With his special eyes, only Riddick can truly see the horrors heading their way, but while everyone is stunned, Paris shouts for them to run. Then for some reason, instead of them all going to the crash ship that they're right next to, they all run to that small section Paris is hiding in. Maybe it's because the crash ship was too exposed, I don't know. Everyone but Shaza and Riddick make it before the swarm descends, but they dive just in time to avoid it. Then, against Jack's advice, Shaza makes the terrible mistake of running for it too soon and pays the iron price. Riddick waits just a bit and makes it over safely, just in time to see the sun fully set and the full-grown bioraptors emerge. They take stock of their situation and assess that they only have a few flashlights and a cutting torch nearby. Johns also guesses the raptors are the reason for the massive boneyard as they hear them overhead. They hear alien whooping and screeching noises, and they speculate they probably use echolocation. The group moves further inside and secures themselves in a room, but it's not as secure as they think because Imam is almost stabbed through the door. They seem trapped, but only for a moment because Riddick found that cutting torch and they cut their way into a different section. As the rest are covering a new hole in the wall, Riddick searches further into the ship, and with his Riddick vision, he sees a raptor devouring something overhead. Sadly, Hassan has wandered over here too. Riddick tries to save him by keeping him still, but it's no good. Too many bioraptors appear and Hassan runs, but he's slaughtered instantly. Riddick makes a break for it while they're distracted and barely gets back to the group, who manages to slay one of the pursuing raptors. It turns out that they're so weak to light it physically burns away their flesh. Taking stock of their supplies again, they count that they have a torch, a couple of hand lights, Paris's alcohol, and John's flares. Fry wants to use all their gear to stay the course, but now they have to carry the cells back to the emergency ship. Tensions rise fast when John says they need to wait and even uses Jack as an excuse. Fry calls Johns a coward and it sets him off, but Riddick gets in the way. Johns has quick hands and he draws a gun on Riddick, but Riddick is just as quick because his grooming appliance is fixed on Johns below the belt. Yeah, I'd probably call that a draw too. Fry can't promise to get them there in the dark, but says that Riddick can. The echoing whoops continue all around as they make the short distance over to the engine of the ship where all the cells are. After dodging a raptor hidden inside, they make their way into the engine room and start dismantling it for cells and light sources. While collecting giant glowing tubes from inside the ship, Riddick also warns everyone to check their cuts since the creatures have a taste for it now. As they get ready for the dangerous mission ahead, Johns reminds Fry that Riddick will attack again as soon as he can. Okay, here we go. The plan works at first and the creatures gather just outside the light, but things are off to a rocky start when the fire from the cutting torch fades and Paris accidentally loses some of the gear. Jack makes a hasty decision to grab it and nearly turns into raptor food. Paris totally freaks out and starts crawling away in a panic until he destroys the lighting from the glowing tubes. Before he can even realize the gravity of his cowardice, he is devoured by the monsters. Everyone else regroups around the cells, and they now have to use the liquor for torches. Riddick and Imam are planning their next steps, and Imam wants to take a shorter, more direct route. Riddick counters, saying that the path is too dangerous because the monsters are attracted to blood, and she is bleeding. But no, he doesn't mean Carolyn Fry. Jack was just pretending to be a boy this whole time to fit in, and that's how they've been tracked. Fry swallows her pride and admits that the plan is not going to work. They have to go back. Johns, who was against the plan from the start, is understandably furious with her choice and says that they're in way too deep to turn back now. Imam tries to calm him down, saying that she's the captain and they follow her orders. However, Johns makes everyone doubt their trust in her whenever he reveals that she had intended to sacrifice the whole passenger cabin during their crash. She tries to shut him up, but he easily tosses her to the side and stomps onward. As they're pushing forward, Johns and Riddick start to walk ahead just out of earshot, and Johns starts to conspire against the group. Riddick entertains him and hears out the plan. He wants Riddick to keep the others at bay so he can sacrifice Jack for bait so the other 5 can make it through the canyon. Riddick actually thinks it's a good plan, with one problem. He wants a bigger piece of bait. A duel to the death begins. Riddick knocks the shotgun away, so they have to fight up close in what little light remains as the creatures echo in the darkness. Of course, Richard Bruno Riddick is much more capable than John, so as their battle draws to an end, Riddick mockingly asks if he remembers that moment that he took off the chains. Riddick reminds Johns that he advised him to end him way back then, and Riddick makes a deep slash across John's back, leaving him to be slaughtered by the creatures while he escapes unharmed into the shadows. Everyone hightailed it when the fight started, but Riddick manages to catch back up with them and tell them what became of Johns. Then he rallies them to continue pushing through to the escape ship. Before they set off, Riddick notices something about a dead bioraptor and studies it. He believes in the middle of their hammerhead shark-shaped skull is a blind spot. Imam pops up around the corner and asks Riddick if he would like to say a prayer. He's already done it with the others, and it's painless after all. Imam doesn't realize what he stepped into because Riddick spits back that it's not painless, it's pointless. Imam starts to say that just because he doesn't believe in God doesn't mean God doesn't believe in you. Riddick goes on to explain the tragedies that he's endured throughout his life and tells Imam that he got it wrong. It's not that he doesn't believe in God, but he hates him. Imam holds his faith and says that nonetheless, the God is still here, and with no pity left to spare, Riddick asks, 2 of your boys are already dead. How much faith do you have left? Okay, so it's do or die time. Everyone is at the canyon. Riddick says to keep the girl in the middle and leave all the heavy power cells to him. Move! Fry bravely leads the charge through the canyon with Riddick carrying the cells in the back. Soon chunks and blue liquid start raining from the sky and Riddick shouts for them not to look up. Of course Fry does and sees that the bioraptors are tearing each other apart in the skies above. They have to weave their way through a boneyard and they nearly get through it without incident until a particularly sneaky raptor was able to slash the leg of Imam's last kid. The group was able to save him, but Riddick continues to march. Jack notices and tries to catch up, but another raptor attacks from above. Thankfully Jack hid under one of the giant bones in time, but it won't withstand the attack for long. Riddick hears her cries and finally turns back to take care of business. The raptor lunges at him, but with his bare hands and raw strength, he holds it back and dodges the chomps. Then, in the blink of an eye, Riddick disembowels the monster. If things didn't seem hopeless already, Riddick laughs as rain starts pouring down and he asks, "Where the hell's your god now?" They manage to scramble under a rocky shelf to keep their torches lit for as long as they can, but Imam's last son is dragged away. With no time to grieve, Riddick shouts for the last of the survivors to hide inside a cave, and then he shuts them inside with a boulder. He continues the dangerous journey alone, but the others soon find some unexpected help inside their cave. There is a colony of bioluminescent bugs, and they have to bottle it up so Fry can catch up to Riddick before he has a chance to leave them stranded. Riddick turns on the ship's lights, and Fry is there to confront him. She pleads for his help to keep her promise that she's made to go back for the others, but Riddick has another idea. Why doesn't she come with him? Faced with an impossible decision, she falls to her knees and momentarily allows herself to join Riddick. But she finds something deep within herself and pushes him off the ship. She climbs over the top of him and declares herself the captain and reaffirms that she isn't leaving anybody on this rock. Riddick effortlessly reverses the situation and holds his knife to her neck and demands to know if she would die for them. Having come a long way from the start of our journey, she says that she would. Back in the cave, Imam and Jack may be running out of time as they hear something moving the boulder. Thankfully, it was just Fry and Riddick coming back for them. Jack didn't have a doubt, and Imam proudly says that there is his god. They line up to make a final charge to the escape ship, but unfortunately, Riddick falls behind after helping the others get up a muddy slope. Fry waits for him, but he's not out of the woods yet. A bioraptor gets the drop on Riddick, and he thinks fast enough to close the distance and gets face to face with the monster so he can test out his blind spot theory. Sure enough, it works, and he remains unseen as it searches. But he's flanked by another one. Fry hears him cry out in pain and goes to help. She sees him barely able to stand due to a slice in his leg and shouts for him to get up. She said that she would die for them, not you. She manages to get him to his feet, but tragically, without warning, Fry is ripped away into the night. Richard cries, "Not for me," into the darkness.
So this wasn't originally planned as a franchise, and Carolyn was supposed to live, but they realized everyone was responding very well to Riddick, and they kept his story open instead.
He gets back to Jack and Mom and starts to prepare the ship for launching, but stops for some reason. Jack starts to panic and begs for him to leave, but he says that he can't leave without saying goodnight as he takes off, engulfing the swarm of bioraptors in the ship's fire and lights.
Let's close with an interesting story from The Hollywood Reporter. So Vin Diesel actually saved the Fast and Furious franchise by doing the cameo at the end of Tokyo Drift, but he only agreed to do that cameo for the rights to Riddick. So in saving the Fast and Furious franchise, he revitalized the Riddick universe too. And he is an absolute legend for that because I love these movies and can't wait to see what happens to Richard Bruno Riddick in the next movie, whenever that comes out. All right, that was Pitch Black. Who doesn't love a good cult classic sci-fi movie? But next we're going to close with Toy Story's cooler live-action older brother, Small Soldiers.
We open with a commercial from Globotech telling everyone the great news about how they're bringing their expertise and working with the Department of Defense to everyday household products, turning swords into plowshares for you and your family, they say ironically as a Globotech sign replaces a Heartland toy sign. The toy maker, Irwin, is shocked to see his boss arriving early by helicopter, so he frantically starts packing his designs. Another toy maker, Larry, arrives to give him a hand, and they start talking about the recent merger on their way down to the meeting. Irwin is bummed that Globotech only seems to care about profits, but that doesn't seem to be an issue for Larry. He's happy with the changes around here, like seeing his new boss's assistant, Miss Kegel. Yep, that's right, her name is Miss Kegel. The new owner of Heartland Toys is the cutthroat business tycoon Gil. He took over and only kept these two because they were responsible for the most successful launch in the company's history. But during Irwin's anxious pitch for the lovable alien Gorgonites, it's clear that Gil isn't convinced they can put lightning in a bottle a second time. He just isn't sold on the idea of toys helping kids learn stuff to help the Gorgonites achieve their mission of getting back to their homeland of Gorgon. Larry jumps in right afterwards with his pitch of the Commando Elite with a video and everything. Gil seems impressed at first, but starts to lose interest when Larry tells him that they can't actually do all the things in the ad. Then Gil goes on a long rant about wanting these toys to actually do the things they show in the commercials for once. He wants the toys to be so smart they can play back, and to ditch the batteries not included nonsense, upgrade these things with a lifetime Globotech battery. Department of Defense stuff. Irwin starts to object, saying that it doesn't really seem feasible currently, but Larry assures Gil that they can do it. Then against Irwin's wishes, Gil observes that all soldiers need enemies, and declares the Gorgonites and Commando Elites as such from now on. Then it goes from bad to worse as Miss Kegel informs the designers that Gil expects these toys in just 3 months. Larry again says that they'll get it done, and she welcomes them by giving them their access cards with their passwords, which Irwin absentmindedly blurts out saying, "Hey, mine's Gizmo." Joe Dante directed both this movie and Gremlins, and you'll see a Gremlin skull on Alan's desk later. Being the well-to-do employee that he is, Larry goes on to order some chips, or microchips, to get started on the toys. He forgets his password, but remembers Irwin shouting out his earlier, and goes on to order a surplus of state-of-the-art military-grade chips. The X-1000 sounds great, and they start building and packaging the deadly Commando Elites and the lovable misfit Gorgonites. Now it's time to meet our unlikely hero, Alan Abernathy, as he bikes across town to his dad's toy shop. We get all we need to know about the state of the store when a kid walks off unimpressed, saying that they never have anything good here. Their delivery driver, Joe, shows up to drop off their order and is surprised to see that Alan's dad, Stuart, has left Alan in charge. We'll learn more about Alan's not-so-squeaky clean record soon, but for now, he and Joe get curious about the new toys in the truck, and they check out Major Chip Hazard, leader of the Commandos, and Archer, emissary of the Gorgonites. They're so impressed with how advanced these toys are that Alan cooks up a scheme while his dad's away at a small business seminar. He rolls a nat 20 on persuasion and convinces Joe to lose a box before they come out on Monday so he can finally make his dad's store a little money around here. And because Joe is a real homie, he even leaves him with the promotional cutouts too. And this is the only place where you can actually see the unedited art because they removed Chip Hazard's gun in the released version. Phil Hartman played the neighbor, also named Phil, and sadly this was one of his last roles. Trying to use sensitive language here, his wife had ended their lives using a firearm. Understandably, that alongside some other tragedies that year were part of the audience's cold reception and some censorship on the final release. Then right away it seems like his plan is going to work because a couple of customers come in and it turns out to be Alan's neighbor, Christy, and her little brother, Timmy. Apparently she's heard of him, but while they talk, Timmy wanders to the back and sees Archer and Chip fighting, and he tells his sister that he found his birthday present. But by the time they get back there, they're gone. Christy starts to tell Timmy that they're too expensive anyways, but he totally humiliates her, saying that they are not because their parents still buy her Gwendy dolls. Totally embarrassed now, she leaves in a hurry, telling Alan to save those two for her. She's friendly on her way out, telling him to come say hi once in a while, but he comes back down to earth once he sees her boyfriend roll up on his cool motorcycle. Then he unknowingly saves the Gorgonite leader from an untimely end at the hands of Chip before setting up the rest of the displays. But he finds his dad's plane ticket is still at the shop, then he races home to catch him. Then we meet the parents. Christy's parents are Phil and Marion, and Phil is obsessed with electronics. He's got a huge home theater set up, and he's installing a new cable dish to go with it. But the problem with that is Alan's parents, Stuart and Irene, are the opposite, and they cannot stand all of his electronic junk, and they certainly don't want Phil to chop off a branch of their tree for better reception. Alan makes it to his father just in time, and his dad seems quite impressed at his son's diligence, while his mom just grills him about making sure he locked up the store correctly. Later, while doing his homework online, Alan notices something moving in his bag, and he's surprised to find that Archer has somehow gotten in there. He says, "Halt, who goes there?" to activate him, and he quickly loses interest, but for a second he thought Archer said his name. Okay, let's meet the rest of the gang. Meanwhile, Chip has woken up the rest of the Commando Elite, and we got Butch Meathook, a sniper, Nick Nitro, demolitionist, Brick Bazooka Artillery, Link Static Communications, and Kip Killigan, covert specialist. Chip reminds them all of their mission to destroy the Gorgonites, and they set out to find new weaponry to do just that. Alan passed out doing his homework, and Archer uses this as an opportunity to learn about us using Alan's computer. He learns all about the history of the United States, from Abraham Lincoln to the Watergate scandal, but in his searches he sees a place so beautiful that it must be the homeland of Gorgon, and the image on screen is the picturesque Yosemite National Park. Alan wakes up to his cat giving Archer a little bath, and he can tell that Archer is just pretending to be a simple toy. He convinces Archer to drop the act, and soon he is declared a friend of Archer, defender of the Gorgonites, and keeper of Encarta. Anyone else remember Encarta? At the shop, the commandos have geared themselves up, and Chip is rallying them to start their hunt of their sworn enemies. They are the best of the best. One of their Gorgonites still in the packaging wakes up just in time to see all this and seemingly hides before they're all spawn killed. The next day, Alan is forced to close the shop because of all the damage the soldiers have caused, and sadly, one of the Gorgonites, Troglokon, did not survive the night, and worse yet, the soldiers and the Gorgonites are still missing. Christy drops back by to get the 2 toys she thought were on hold, but Alan has to give her the bad news that he thinks someone broke in and took the toys. She looks at the state of the place and asks if he's trying to do some insurance scam, but at this point Alan has had it. He did one thing wrong and now he's branded for life. She's heard that he's got kicked out of 10 schools, but with a defeated look he says that it was only 2. Then she offers her down-on-his-luck neighbor a hand at cleaning. While picking up the place, Alan notices that even his dad's radio is messed up somehow when Christy strikes up a conversation with her neighbor. They start chatting and getting closer because they both love things like The X-Files and Led Zeppelin. Kirsten Dunst definitely locking in that girl next door archetype before Spider-Man a few years later. They finish resetting the store faster than expected and even surprise themselves. They fix the boat somehow. Stuart pops in on his way back home from the airport to check on his son, and almost right away he notices the boat wasn't as fixed as they thought. The mast snaps after Stuart fiddles with it and Christy exits stage left, but does Alan a real solid and sneaks out some of the evidence of his failed scheme. She gives Archer back to him outside, and then she takes off with her obviously much cooler boyfriend. You can tell because he has a motorcycle. As if Stuart wasn't already mad enough at his son already, he goes to fix the boat and notices that his tools are missing. Alan throws the fallen Gorgonite's parts into the dumpster and he jumps out of the frying pan and into the fire. The Commando Elite spot him leaving and launch an attack to get Archer. Luckily, Alan's roads are a lot like mine, and he hits enough potholes to shake off Brick Bazooka, but he held on long enough to show the rest of the troop where Archer and Alan went. The special effects for this movie were done by Industrial Light and Magic, who are also behind a few small indie movies like Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Transformers, and Jumanji. Check out my video on that if you haven't seen it yet. But they brought the Commandos and Gorgonites to life by using a combination of CG, remote-controlled animatronics, and good old-fashioned puppeteers, sometimes up to 5 at once for a single character. Alan calls into Globotech's Heartland Toys hotline, and after a great deal of frustration talking with the person, he's able to leave a nasty voicemail about how crazy these toys are along with his phone number. Speaking of Globotech, they're in the middle of celebrating their launch of their new toys, but Irwin pulls Larry aside to show him the voicemail. It doesn't take long for Irwin to deduce that Alan's voicemail could be serious because of the chips that Larry used. You know, the state-of-the-art ones from Globotech's military division? At the Abernathy house, Alan is sleeping while Archer is studying the back of his box, but he hears what sounds to be a Gorgonite distress call from down the hallway. But oh no, it's a trap! Alan hears some rustling down the hall and wakes up and barely saves Archer before he's sent down the garbage disposal. Nick Nitro jumps out and cuts Alan's hands with a Dremel, but takes Archer's place down the disposal for his effort. Stuart and Irene finally hear the ruckus happening in their kitchen, and they come out to find Alan with a cut on his hand. The jig is up at this point, so Alan comes clean about the whole scheme. Stuart tries to piece the whole story together and assumes Alan must have pawned his tools for the money to buy the toys, but it's just a bridge too far for him to believe when Alan says that it was the toys that took the tools. And it doesn't help that Archer pretended to be a toy until he and Alan were alone again. Alan groans that he won't be able to pay Joe back now, but Archer keenly points out that the Commandos wouldn't still be hunting the other Gorgonites if they were already destroyed. Regrouping in Stuart's garage, the soldiers prepare to use their tools to upgrade their weaponry again and deal with the Gorgonites and human allies when Nick Nitro uses the last of his strength to run out of batteries in front of his comrades. There was a really fun running joke in the behind-the-scenes featurette where Tommy Lee Jones' Chip Hazard was treated like a real actor. They interviewed him on his own little chair, and he said he directed most of the movie, and all the other actors complained about how he was bullying everyone on set. Back at the store, Archer tells Alan all about the Gorgonites' cowardly programming, but he gets a pretty good idea of where the rest of them might be after he throws an apple away. He checks the dumpster out back, and Archer recognizes Ocula's giant eye, which is next to a Gizmo toy for any eagle eyes out there, but they also find the rest. Punch It, Scratch It, Insaniac, Slamfist, and Troglocon? His allies have repaired him with Stewart's radio, and Alan dubs him Frankenstein. Larry and Irwin try to figure out just how bad they messed up, and they visit the department that made the X-1000 chip powering the toys, and its creator Ralph gives them some seriously bad news. These things are beyond artificial intelligence, and they actually learn like you mere mortals who aren't just a disembodied voice like me. But Ralph does admit they do have one flaw. They're sensitive to electromagnetic pulses, or EMPs, and as they leave, Ralph puts it simply, they can learn within the bounds of their own programming. Christy calls Alan to celebrate their mostly successful cover-up at the store, and Alan takes his shot to ask her out to properly celebrate, but she turns him down, saying she only dates older guys. But there is this troublemaker that isn't so bad, hinting at Alan, of course. As their budding romance continues, we see the commandos were spying on the call and hatch a plan to use Christy against Alan, the defender of the Gorgonites. And speaking of them, we get my favorite scene. The other Gorgonites also find a picture of Yosemite National Park, and they believe it's their home, but Alan corrects them, saying their home is in a window on their computer or a window on his bedroom. And they ask, well, what is beyond the window? He says the trees, and they ask what's beyond them, and then beyond the mall, and then the highway, until Alan eventually says there's about 1 million acres of farms. He doesn't know what's beyond that, but they do. It's their home of Gorgon. Now at Christie's house, the soldiers need to get rid of her parents for a while so they can take her hostage. Operation Sandman. They use a teaspoon, a mousetrap, and some sleep aid to catapult some medicine into their drinks and knock them out. Phil randomly has the most out-of-pocket line I've ever heard, saying, "You know, I think World War II is my favorite war." Like, total Zap Brannigan line. They make their way up to Christie's room and easily tie up little Timmy, and then they see them. Christie's collection of Gwendy dolls. Chip denies his soldiers' request for a 3-day R&R pass and orders them to get Nick Nitro's body because, after all, a mind is a terrible thing to waste. Chip takes out Nick's X-1000 and they modify the random electronics in the room to start reanimating the Gwendy dolls. Cannon Fodder Gwendy reporting for duty. The song they used to bring the dolls to life was called Bombshelly, and it was an homage to the Bride of Frankenstein. But now that everyone's here, I want to shout out the voice talent. The people behind the mockumentary This Is Spinal Tap voiced the Gorgonite crew, and the people from the war movie The Dirty Dozen voiced the Commando Elites. Lastly, Sarah Michelle Gellar and Christina Ricci were the voices behind the non-copyright infringing Gwendy dolls. Briefly checking in with Alan and Archer, the Gorgonite spots the Commando Elites in the trees, but Alan tells him that it's just the wind. Archer is plastic so he can't feel it, but Alan teaches him the very wise adage that just because you can't see something, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. After getting home and saying bye to her boyfriend, Christy sees that her parents are passed out, but somehow misses her little brother tied up in the closet. Upstairs in her room, she sees what happened to her dolls, and she screams in terror as they attack, quickly tying her down. Luckily, the boyfriend is still outside, trying to think of the least lousy excuse to come back up when he hears Christy shout, causing him to jump to the rescue. Or maybe not, because he's lit on fire and promptly gets the hell out of there. Ocula sees something through Alan's telescope and frantically tries to get everyone's attention until he is pinned to the wall by a tool with a VHS labeled Surrender. On the tape, Christy is totally not at all coerced into proposing the Gorgonite surrender in exchange for her safe release. But being the schemer that he is, Alan has another idea. It seems like Alan is out of options, so he drops off a box of Gorgonites pleading for their lives in front of Christie's house. The soldiers move in to finish off their enemies, but Alan is surely up to something as he sends Archer into the sky with a toy rocket. Archer unlocks the back door and they sneak up to find Christy still held hostage. Archer frees her and she and Alan club some of the Gwendy dolls before they're forced to retreat out the bedroom window. While the rescue was going on, the commandos blew up that box of Gorgonites. But wait, it was actually just a decoy using a radio with some Wiggler toys, now on her moped. It looks like Alan and Christy are home free, but the garage opens up and the soldiers start chasing them with modified RC cars with deadly weaponry, like Twisted Metal Small Brawl. The soldiers nearly catch up to them by rocketing down trees and power lines, but Christy successfully jumps a ditch while the soldiers fall short in a fiery explosion, seemingly to their end, right? Nope. Chip floated down to Toy World, where Joe was about to finish delivering all those other Commando Elites in his truck. Too bad. Chip drafts him to the cause. Alan and Christy get back to his house, and they don't have to spend long trying to convince their parents that the toys are responsible for everything when good old Irwin and Larry arrive. Larry asks Alan for a rundown, then he earns himself a punch to the jaw from Stewart when he reminds Alan that any claims need to be proven in court. However, Irwin is amazed to see the Gorgonites in action, and his creation seemed just as amazed to meet him. But the good times are cut short when they notice Joe's delivery truck out front, followed by a quick mobilization of Chip's growing forces. While showing off props behind the scenes, they said they used about an actual ton of urethane to make the 237 models for the toy characters. Now convinced, Phil decides they can do without being caught up in the Commando Elite and Gorgonite war and tries to surrender the Gorgonites. The coast looks clear, but then he notices his stereo out in the yard and he activates Chip's trap card. They spring out ready to eliminate Phil and Chip ends the negotiations, declaring that all 16 of the Gorgonite scum must die. Larry does the math for everybody, saying 7 Gorgonites and 9 humans. Thanks, Larry. Under the cover of the classic 2000s hit Wannabe by the Spice Girls blaring through Phil's stereo, the Commando Elites begin to wage war on the house. Irene uses her training as a stewardess to stay calm during the chaos and wields a tennis racket to swat incoming munitions away while the nerds of the house start to formulate a plan. After the toys' weakness to EMPs are mentioned, Archer points to the transformers on the power lines and Alan tells the others. Irwin confirms that it would be a big enough EMP to fry the chips, so Alan knows what he has to do and Stewart reluctantly lets him go. Now, I'm not going to pretend to be an electrician to fact check this, but Irwin also points out that they need power running through the transformers, so the rest of them have to go to Christie's house to wedge the breakers open. Their parents have no trouble standing up against the Commandos, but it takes the Gorgonites some convincing from Archer. He rallies them, saying that if they only hide, they'll surely lose anyway, so no more hiding. They join the fight, and they're more than enough to turn the tide in their favor, wiping out most of Chip's reinforcements. Archer tells Alan that this is his chance to get to the Transformers, but before leaving, Alan hesitates, telling his new companion that when he sets off the EMP, the Gorgonites are going to be fried just like the Commando Elite. Understanding his fate, Archer still insists he goes. The final battle begins. Alan climbs the power line, but he's met by Chip in a weaponized RC helicopter. The Gorgonites work together to lift and fire a turret to take Chip out, but he Yoshis his chopper out of there and he starts to stab at Alan's fingers. With a very clever maneuver, Archer sends his rope over the power line to the spinning tornado Gorgonite in order to launch himself up there. Archer's fateful battle with Chip Hazard sadly goes as expected. The Commando leader is more capable than the Gorgonite emissary, so Chip knocks him to the ground. But while Chip was gloating about his victory over his rival, Alan takes this moment to use Chip as a way to connect those Transformers together. The sparks send Alan to the ground too, but thankfully a branch breaks his fall. Makes me think back on Phil cutting the branches earlier, but the rest of Chip's forces start to circle Alan, and Christie saves the day one last time by shredding the soldiers with a riding lawnmower and scooping Alan up again. And while they ride away to safety, the Globotech nerds inside finish wedging open the breakers at Christie's and send out the giant EMP to finish off all the toys. In the aftermath of the battle the next day, Gil from Globotech flies in on a helicopter to basically give everyone Scrooge McDuck piles of money and decides that Chip has a place in the military after all this. Dennis Leary joked that he had a bad experience with the Muppets, which is why none of his scenes had any of the toys in them. But overall, the scenes with the adults were streamlined. There were deleted scenes that showed Phil setting up his equipment earlier, and some more scenes after the toys were already battling. And there was actually a small subplot that was cut where Alan's parents had really missed their lives back in Chicago, which I would have liked because that would make the ending seem a little less bittersweet after they lose their home. While picking up debris, Alan finds a tiny crossbow near an overturned satellite dish and finds the Gorgonites doing what they do best, hiding. Archer pretends to be malfunctioning until Alan confirms the Commandos are dead and they all spring to life, celebrating going against their fate and somehow winning. In a final send-off, Alan borrows the boat from his dad's store and the Gorgonites get ready to set sail on their final journey home to Gorgon. Alan asks one more time if they're sure they want to do this, and he cautions that they might not even find Gorgon. Before he can finish saying that it may not exist, Archer reminds him that just because you can't see something, that doesn't mean it isn't there. Alan nods in understanding and sends the Gorgonites off to find their home.
Alright, that's a wrap on our first 4-pack. We're definitely going to be doing more of these in the future, so let me know if there's any particular themes you'd like to see, but at the risk of sounding like a broken record, thank you guys so much for 500 subscribers and all the support so far. I'm just a teeny tiny little channel, so anything you do to support me, likes, comments, subscribes, all that stuff helps a ton. But that's all I've got for you on this one. I'm sure I'll catch you very soon for another breakdown, but till then, y'all be good. Thanks. Hey, you made it to the end. Remember, if you want to revisit any more of your favorite movies, check the links on screen, but otherwise, subscribe and I'll catch you for a new breakdown next week. Thanks.